layers of complexity which are much closer to the surface in South Africa than there are in other places. So South Africa's story itself is so complicated and so interesting over the last 20 years, and that produces a context in which every business story has to relate to other stories. So how does the story of what's happening in this company fit with the needs of black economic empowerment? How does it fit with the needs of communities that have been seriously divided by their history? All leadership, in my view, is about projecting an idea and making it happen. What makes leadership in South Africa so dynamic is that the country as a whole is in a process of transformation. Corporate leaders in South Africa are at the heart of this. They have to run competitive companies like anywhere else, but also redress the inequalities of the past.
The whole process of transformation is actually a management of fears and aspirations. You have to manage the fears of the white individual, and then on the other hand, it's the aspirations of the people of colour. It's easier to manage the aspirations of individuals than it is to manage the fears.
Netcare is South Africa's largest private health care provider. Of the companies we visited, it's the one that has aligned its story most closely with South Africa's. Nelson Mandela's portrait hangs over the entrance, and the national constitution is the foundation stone of the company's values.
This is the opening preamble of the constitution, which is quite beautiful when you read it, and most South Africans have it.
This, to me, is an overt embrace of a South African ideal.
I think it's unique to South Africa's history, and it takes into account our past, where we've come from and where we need to go. And you can't build a sustainable country without recognizing what's happened, and that's what it really says. We, as the leadership of Netcare, in harmony with the preamble to the Constitution of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who've suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who've worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. To take individual responsibility for enabling transformation. It's not waiting for others to lead. Every person leads. In Netcare, through our own personal transformation, embracing our values of care, dignity, participation, truth.
Advising that is a real truth and reconciliation document.
Correct.
It's got exactly the same spirit. I've never seen a leadership pledge before, and I think it's the most interesting idea. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think the actual production of that, I'd love to know more about how you came to it, because the way, the process of producing that would actually transform most companies, I think.
The process of developing our values transform Netcare.
There's a very strong dividing line in South Africa between people who are part of the formal economy and those who aren't. The gap between rich and poor here is one of the highest in the world.
There is some changes, but it will take more time to be a little bit level. It will take maybe 20 years or more than that.
Government has placed the duty of accelerating the rate of change on corporate South Africa. In Alexandra, a township on the edge of Johannesburg, Investec, a leading bank, set up the business place to encourage black entrepreneurs. One of the stories we found here was sobering. Damaged former combatants embarking on a difficult journey of psychological recovery and financial survival with a small jewelry business.
We've got skills, we've got everything, but we came here down having nothing, trauma and so forth. All those things are out. Then we can see now we are people. So everything becomes right, and we can see that we are progressing. And we need to progress more than we are progressing.
It's a good start then.
So it's a good start.
The Alexander Ex-Combatant Association proudly presents a product handcrafted by a former ex-combatant. By purchasing one of these products, you will be assisting our group of 30 members to become self-sustaining.
Whatever that comes from your mind.
Their next business plan is to make gravestones. SAB Miller is the country's leading brewery and an international colossus. Like many South African companies, it made a lot of money in the apartheid era. We visited in the week that they announced the biggest black empowerment deal in the country. The leader's role in any environment is to decide what the company's story should be and then to encourage people to be willing characters in that story, to play their part. What we found was a profound alignment between the leader's narrative and the individuals we met.
So the transaction that we've just announced is that we're selling 10% of equity of our company, which is ownership in SAB Limited. We're splitting the transaction 40-40-20, so it goes 40% to retailers, black-owned retailers. The other 40% goes to employees, to our black employees, and 20% goes to the SAB Foundation, which will be an evergreen organisation that does charitable work in historically disadvantaged communities.
I mean, there's certainly some tension that you're giving Asian shares in another group us.
It's funny, South Africans, we're funny about race. We're so open about race because of our history. I mean, I completely know that there's no reason on earth I should get shares in SAB because I was not disadvantaged during apartheid growing up in this country.
I agree totally. Yeah. I mean, I was 13 in 1994, so I missed a lot of this. As I get older and make more friends and expand my horizons, I learn a lot about our history, and I realize that I've definitely been advantaged, much more than my black colleagues.
Mentality that I think we wouldn't understand in any other countries. The fact that this equity scheme for black people, I mean, it would raise outrageous among other employees in any other countries if they give to a certain amount of people equity into the other people not. So it's very interesting to see the different mentality in it.
Having not been here at the time of understanding the power of the Truth and Reconciliation style, that actually it can only have come from the real success of that, because otherwise there would not be a white community bought in, genuinely wanting, like the guy said, I didn't know I was 13 when it happened to me, and yet, he completely understands the disadvantaged situation that black people would be.
This alignment was apparent at Pick n Pay, the country's largest supermarket chain. A family business, the founder's daughter, Suzanne Ackerman, is head of transformation.
If we want to run a supermarket on world-class standards, we have to give people the tools to do that. Realizing that 65% of our workforce live in informal settlements, we realize that many of our staff have to travel from 4 o'clock in the morning to be at work by 7 or 8, and that's the realities of South Africa. They probably don't have time to eat. So we provide subsidized meals for all our staff. All 60,000 staff get subsidized meals every single day of the week. You look at a country like Holland or Denmark for that reason, they don't have to worry about issues because society has always taken care of health, welfare, housing, education. But in this country, we have an enormous backlog.
The story of Sibusiso Shabalala tells us what can happen when leaders join up the dots to make things work for other people. Sibusiso was a peasant child with a 4-hour walk to school, and he amused himself by starting fires in the veld.
And then in the holidays he'd go and spend time on his grandfather's farm. The grandparents just lived in a shack on this farm. 3 years ago he gets a phone call, just after his grandfather had died, that he has not only inherited his grandfather's estate, which he thought was nothing because he was a very poor black man, but it appears that in the 1910 Land Act, that farm was taken away from his family. The family were allowed to live there in what they used to call the slave cottages on the property. When he went to the farm, after overcoming the emotion and everything, it had been totally overrun with wattle. And of course he had this obsession for fire, and he could see what he could do with it. He turned it into charcoal. He is now a national supplier for charcoal and wood around the country. And for us, this is true empowerment. This is not about giving a percentage of your company to Tokyo Sequali or any of the other very wealthy black individuals in South Africa. This is empowerment.
This film is based on a week-long visit to South Africa in which we saw a small part of a few companies at one particular moment in time. What I find so exciting about transformation in South Africa is that it's so close to the surface. People talk about it. They talk about the problems and issues that get swept under the carpet in less open societies. They also talk about the country that they want and the companies that they want, about the excitement of getting it right and the danger of getting it wrong.